Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Vago Muradian. Our podcast is brought to you by Bell. Since 1935, Bell has been redefining flight. Learn more about its pioneering spirit at bellflight.com. After extraordinary pressure from state and local governments, President Trump changed course and cleared General Motors and Ford to start making ventilators, face masks, and more. General Motors said that it would use its facility in Kokomo, Indiana, to manufacture FDA-cleared ventilators along with Ventec Life Systems, a leading respirator maker. And the car maker also said that it would produce level 1 surgical masks at its facility in Warren, Michigan. Ventilators would start deliveries next month, and the company said that it would be producing 50,000 masks a day within 2 weeks. I should note that General Motors Defense sponsors our technology coverage. Joining us now is Jerry McGinn, PhD, West Point graduate and former Army officer, who is the former Deputy Director of the Pentagon's Office of Manufacturing and Industrial Base Policy, who is now the Executive Director of the Center for Government Contracting at George Mason School of Business. Jerry, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here, Vago.
And Jim Hassick, another PhD, who is a Senior Research Fellow at Jerry's program at GMU, and is also the editor of the Atlantic Council's Defense Industrialist blog, where he also does research. Jim, always a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
Jerry, let's start with you. President and the administration has faced a little bit of criticism for not moving fast enough to harness commercial industry to address this crisis. And even the Pentagon leadership has faced some sharp questions about what the defense industry is doing to help in this crisis. You sat in the industrial base office of the Pentagon, and this is a topic that you've thought a lot about strategically and even written about more recently. At a moment like this of national peril and crisis, what are the roles going backward and forward? What are the roles the defense industry can play in order to support commercial industry? How can commercial industry be harnessed to solve some of these manufacturing challenges, especially for bottleneck specialty items like this kind of medical equipment? And Jim, I want to get your take on what the state of the manufacturing art is that will have to be harnessed in order to make this happen. Jerry?
Yeah, great question, Vago. Well, I think the administration is clearly taking an all of the above approach. They're trying to do several different lines of effort. Some of them are involving the defense industry or new entrants in the defense industry, some of them not. First, they're trying to maximize existing production lines and get as much as they can to the marketplace. They're working with industry on that. They're also doing areas, there's a number of solicitations on the street for, building prototypes and of medical equipment ventilators that from other kind of sources. So they're doing that through commercial innovation, working directly with companies, as well as through solicitation through the different agencies, HHS, the DoD and the like. So they're trying to do those short-term, medium-term opportunities. And I think where the Department of Defense has helped through the Defense Production Act, actually it's a presidential authority, is two ways. One is in the rating of contracts, giving HHS the direct authority to rate contracts so they can move their things to the top of their orders at the top of the queue if they wanted to do so. And secondly, the other place that they're using, you'll see the Defense Production Act being used very soon, is on rebuilding capacity in the pharmaceutical supply chain and some other areas like that, which is kind of a medium-term effort, and that's kind of rebuilding factories, so we're less reliant on sole source situations in China. So as you're going to see a lot of opportunities there. There was $3 billion in the bill that just passed for the DPA fund, the Defense Production Act fund. That is traditionally about $60 million a year appropriation. So to have $3 billion come out is a tremendous influx. And there's going to be tremendous opportunities for defense for companies that are interested in that. And actually, I think I just saw a note that Lord has stood up a joint task force, Ellen Lord, the Undersecretary for Acquisition Sustainment, a joint task force to help manage all that, because that's going to be bringing in HHS specialists and other ones. But that's I see a lot of short-term, mid-term opportunities that way.
But one of the questions that everybody's asking, and I think Undersecretary Lord got some sharp questioning from reporters on this, was why it's taken so long to get this ball rolling, right? I mean, one of the things the Pentagon and indeed the people who look at industrial mobilization on the National Security Council have always done is to try to figure out, okay, look, how quickly can we move to try to leverage and harness this capability, understanding, this is not gazelle-like in the speed with which folks can shift. How do you overcome that time element when you get off the blocks a little bit slower than you'd like, given the death rates? I mean, in Italy, Italy lost more than 900 people in 24 hours.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of it is that a lot of the real expertise in doing this kind of mobilization was not at all in this area. So I think that accounts for some of it, and there's that kind of expertise was in the department to a large degree, but it was not deployed elsewhere, and I don't understand the rationale behind the decision not to do that. But and they've taken the administration's taken a more collaborative approach, like partnering with industry, and you're starting to see some things happening on its own, like the recent JV that you mentioned between GM and that other company. And the role for government is really to be sort of an orchestrator of all these different efforts, and that's there's going to be chaos in a situation like this, and there is, I'll leave it to historians to judge whether or not they could have done it better.
Right.
When you look further away from this.
I will tell you that there's a little bit of frustration on General Motors' point, because the company a couple of months ago, I mean, I'm not trying to lawyer for them, obviously, because they're one of our sponsors, but one of the things, when we visited their facilities in early March was, hey, we have capacity that we're willing to leverage. And there was this sense that they were partnering and trying to move the ball forward, but nobody was sort of giving them a go ahead in order to try to execute that until we got to today. Jim, let me bring you into the conversation here in one of sort of the nation's leading experts on manufacturing technology and how that can be harnessed for national security need, in any capacity. At this point, what's the manufacturing state of the art? How easy is it for a car maker, right? There's a lot of things that General Motors can bring to this equation, or any car maker can. Ford is one of the manufacturers as well.
Oh, sure.
Ferrari, right? Fiat Chrysler. And Ferrari in Italy.
Tesla has volunteered. Yes.
Tesla is in it. Ferrari has partnered with CRA, which is an Italian company that's a respirator maker, to try to help as well. But what's the manufacturing state of the art? How easily can a car make, right? I mean, you have engineering ability, you have distribution ability, which obviously these companies have. But talk to us a little bit about the manufacturing capacity and how easily that can be adapted, because this isn't World War II, where it was a little bit easier to make that shift, which you've also studied and written extensively.
I like that you characterize it as an end-to-end problem, from parts sourcing through distribution. Actually, I'm not sure that they got the distribution network that's right for doing this, right? I mean, a company like General Motors or Ford is very good at putting pickup trucks onto car carriers and sending them to dealerships. But that's completely the wrong kind of truck, right? But that doesn't matter. We can find other trucks. The fact actually, and that gets really to the issue, the fact that it's a car company is iconic, and it's a little inspiring, and it brings us back to thinking about World War II, but it almost doesn't matter. Any company that has acumen in large scale, high volume manufacturing will have some abilities here. I think actually, though, that things are not so different than they were during the Second World War that we can't draw some analogies, or rather that we don't need to lament that we've lost something, because yes, manufacturing technology is now much more specific to products. Manufacturing, while it was relatively automated, in the 20s and 30s and then through World War II, is now much more automated. We're extraordinarily productive in this country at manufacturing when we're actually making things, like we were a few weeks ago. But I say that it doesn't really matter that it's a car company. And by that I say, you're not actually going to make ventilators on the production line that you use to make pickup trucks. Because if you think about it, you've got machine tools, you get jigs, you've got robots, you've got all kinds of equipment that is totally inappropriate, actually, for making anything.
Extremely optimized for the job it's got to do.
Yeah. So you're not going to make it in that facility. What you're going to do, and I noted this from the press release that General Motors had, they're doing the ventilators in Kokomo, which is not actually a car plant. Kokomo is actually an electronic components factory. We're going to make something that's got a lot of electronic content. We're going to do it at an electronics factory. We just happen to be a car company that has an that still does a good bit of its stuff vertically, right? They got 270 acres there. They can put 1,000 people on it, and that's the other key thing. So they're going to do. They said, to make it sound big, they said 10,000 a month. Well, that works out to about 330 a day, and they're going to have 1,000 people working on it. So this is going to be a very labor-intensive approach. That sounds antiquated. It's actually exactly the right way to go, because if you want to get first product out the door as fast as you can, and they're aiming for 2 weeks, and God bless them, I hope they do. Really, that would be very impressive. You need just to throw bodies at the problem, and to put it this way, it's it's not as though there's a high marginal cost to pulling some people back out of furlough and having them do this, as long as you can convince them to come in for the job. And it's an emergency; they really should, right?
So
I'm highly impressed that they think they can do it. Please.
Just like World War II, it's the fact that you had a very large skilled work pool that you could draw off of and shift, because they weren't making cars. And right now they're not making as many cars. Therefore, they're available to be. And I should tell the audience that you and I participated in a National Defense University effort last year to queue up some defense industrial mobilization. So that's one of the reasons why it was a great opportunity. So
it's actually a really good thing that I want to say that when there are a lot of people like to bust in the Trump administration. I'm probably on that list, but one thing I think that a number of people got right in the Defense Department was to refocus attention on industrial mobilization for great power war. Just happens to be that in part because they started again to think about this in 2017, maybe a little late to need, but in 2017, that there are a few people who have been thinking about this again. And we do also have an example from the Iraq War. To be frank, the Bush and then Obama administrations did have some people thinking deep thoughts about at least industrial surges on a small scale to support armored vehicle manufacturing, to produce quickly a lot of blast-resistant vehicles to help the troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we have some experience with this, but it's really, these are Cold War concepts that we haven't really, inculcated into the bureaucracy and into the mass of military officers, field and flight grade officers, for maybe 3 decades.
Jerry?
I was going to slightly disagree with you, Jim, but only slightly. So I think
you can do that.
Yeah, so we have started to relook at industrial base and industrial capacity issues, but I don't think we've done as much looking at industrial mobilization. So I would kind of distinguish those.
No, I think that's a very fair point.
So because we did that when I was in government, we did that executive order looking at the manufacturing and defense industrial base and supply chains, which was something we've been doing on an annual basis in my old office. But we really amped it up, and that's led to a whole lot of Defense Production Act projects on like rare earth capacity, specialty chemicals, really small UAVs, things that are sole source situations to China. So, I think we still have a long way to go on the actually.
Well, there's a long way to go. I think people have asked the questions. I don't think they've generated many of the answers at all. Yeah.
Spoken like a good academic. The question I want to put to both of you is, as we look for lessons in this and we look ahead to, crises like this do queue up issues that folks should be looking at from a national security perspective, and how to do it right. God forbid it's necessary in the future. Jerry, and then Jim, give us sort of 2 parts. What should happen next in this process as we deal with coronavirus? What should we be keeping our eye on, and what does the White House need to keep its eye on? The Pentagon, but as well as people across industry who listen to this podcast, be thinking about as everybody tries to better prepare, God forbid, for a potential great power armed conflict in the future where some of these authorities' skill sets would be needed.
what needs to happen for the current situation is we really need to work through what are the best avenues to bring things to the fight in terms of what are the most successful contract vehicles, what are the most successful ways of mass producing these kind of things we need, the PPE and the ventilators for the current situation, and getting, using multiple avenues with the Defense Production Act, OTs, ODAs, other kind of prototypes to develop those situations, and as well as commercial partnerships like the GM joint venture, and then merge to which one is going to be best in the short run. In the medium term, we've got to do things to strengthen our manufacturing and industrial base in areas where to forestall some challenges in the future, and that's in like pharmaceutical and healthcare supply chain, strengthening that. This is not a Buy America effort, but really a national security effort, and that's where the Defense Production Act Title III would come in, and I see that as part of the medium-term effort. And then, so that's the industrial piece on the overall, for great power competition or implications for the national defense strategy. There, I think, biological warfare, in other words, is back. This is biological warfare, in another way. And so that needs to be part of our planning for our national security going forward. Full stop.
And I should point out, you mean biological, right? Because I mean, there are some rather crazy theories out there, but I think everybody understands what you mean by that.
I'm just.
Right.
It's a biological event, and that,
right.
It came through, through not natural, but through, kind of, normal health kind of situations.
Right.
But essentially it is biological warfare in the sense of the impact that it's had. I know our adversaries are looking at this and saying, wow, you want to stop 20% of GDP, 25% of GDP? Here's how you do it,
Right.
and, so that needs to be going forward. But yeah, I'm not trying to buy into any of the things, conspiracy things.
Yeah. Hey, look, if you wanted to bring U.S. GDP to zero, a cyber attack that takes out our internet right about now would be a horrifyingly good way to try to do that. Jim, finish us off on both of those points as you look at this, both for what should be next in terms of dealing with this crisis, but also what are some of the lessons learned as we stockpile those to be better prepared for the future.
In the short run, dealing with coronavirus, I'll tell you, I think that some of the heroes of this thing after the fact are going to turn out to be some very sort of mid-grade people, some GS-14s in government, some engineers at places like Ventec and GM, some logisticians who are going to solve some very basic deck plate sourcing problems. We talked about the manufacturing. I actually don't think that's going to be the grand issue. The grand issue is going to be at a place just, like General Motors, working with Ventec, their partner. They got 700 parts that go into that ventilator, and nobody at the company, GM that is, has ever seen any of them until the day that they show up. And I don't know the first darn thing, unfortunately, about the VOCSN that they're going to build there, but you can imagine there are some custom parts that come from exactly one manufacturer. And who knows where that is. And those guys might need a whole lot of capital all of a sudden to expand rapidly. They got to go find some people. These are really blocking and tackling kind of problems. And usually these are things that don't get the attention of people in government, but a lot of the wheels are going to get greased by some phone calls. And that's, I think, is going to be very helpful. That's the short run. In the long run, I agree with Jerry that it's very good that there's now some money being freed up for Title III DPA investments in pharmaceutical or medical device makers, where perhaps a little bit too much of the supply chain for national security purposes had gone to China. I hope that, given the, I would say, not particularly economically enhancing proclivities of, say, this administration, that in the future, when we think about this, we do so having in mind reasons of national security and not just bare knuckles protectionism when we try to justify things on national security grounds. This administration, I think, has a bad record of that.
Is there anything that the classical defense industrial base can and should be doing for this commercial situation? Or is it best to keep them focused on doing F-35 working shipyards, delivering all the stuff that we need on that front, right? I mean, is there any crossover at this point? Or are there any skill sets, whether it's Jerry or Jim, that could be brought to bear here or not?
Yeah, I think there are a couple areas. I think in general, the best thing for most traditional defense companies is to continue doing their work. But if they have any adjacencies or any parts of their companies or firms that can have any kind of relevance for the space, that they should pursue those ways to help. And I see two ways. A lot of the non-traditionals or the new entrants that are working with DIU, other folks to do projects, could pursue some of these sources sought or other opportunities to build prototypes. For instance, I was talking with one company that does space mission, does space work. But they're actually trying to build a prototype for a ventilator for low cost production. So, and they're pursuing a couple of these opportunities to help. The other place is there's a niche kind of part of the base that focuses on special operations, deployable medical equipment, and field hospitals and like that industry. Probably a lot of it's around special operations command should be absolutely kind of all in, trying to find ways that they can contribute to this, and that's where I think a lot of the Department of Defense opportunities are going to lie.
Jim, 30 seconds. Supply base, sort of supply chain more broadly, right? I mean, you mentioned, for example, that there are, right? I mean, when the Obama administration, I should point out, Jerry, you're a proud Republican, but you did serve in the Obama administration to do a very important job at an important time. Jim, talk to us a little bit about the resilience in the supply chain. Everybody's been relying on just-in-time delivery kind of across the board. This is causing some folks to reconsider that. Certainly the trade war caused people to reconsider that. But at the end of the day, we still sort of made it work. Does this highlight some different kind of approaches we need? Because the ability to surge, I mean, if you look at each and every single one of these subcontractors is facing just-in-time also at the end of the day, without really a lot of variety that they can access as well. What are the changes that are just fundamental into this just-in-time, highest profitability environment that we've been living in for the last few decades?
Well, if one guy in your industry goes just in time, then everybody has an impetus to go just in time. And by the way, then the profits get competed away. What happens then is, the surplus accrues to the consumers in the end. Now, does this create supply chain vulnerabilities? Absolutely, it certainly does. Do we have short-term problems when protectionism causes trade patterns to shift? Absolutely. When they shift, after they shift, even if it's mostly a domestic matter, we go back to just in time, at least in a peacetime situation. The lesson I take from all of this is actually that stockpiling for certain medical needs is probably a really good idea, and we just didn't do enough of that. We've had a couple of these. This is the worst by far since at least 57, but we've had a couple of these pandemics or epidemics at least come around lately. It's probably time to start taking this pretty seriously and building out more capacity on the medical side of things. But I don't think I can issue a blanket admonishment to industry that, hey, you should keep more raw materials inventory around just in case. I'm not sure why.
Guys, thanks very much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. Jerry, thank you. Jim, thank you. And I should have pointed out to our audience that you are a former naval officer as well. So we have a great bit of Army-Navy cooperation here, which is always very encouraging to see, except during football season, of course.
Yeah, I'm being outnumbered here, so I got to end with a beat Navy. But it was really great to talk with you, Vago. And of course, it was always great to work with Jim. And thanks for all you're doing in this really critical time.
This is very important stuff, Vago. Thanks for covering this issue.
It's an honor and pleasure, and you guys also do terrific stuff. Always great to highlight what you guys are doing at George Mason University, because I think what you guys are doing truly is unique. Guys, thanks very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and look forward to having you back on again soon.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. Please follow our daily interviews with top government, military, industry, and thought leaders at Defense and Aerospace Report, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at DEFAERO Report. That's at DEFAERO Report. Like us on Facebook at Defense and Aerospace Report, and check us out on LinkedIn. And check out our weekly cyber report sponsored by Northrop Grumman, and our technology report sponsored by General Motors Defense. For more than 80 years, Bell has pushed past the boundaries of what's possible to drive aviation forward, going above and beyond flight. bellflight.com. Thanks again to Bell for their generous sponsorship, and we'll see you again tomorrow.